Hey everybody, welcome to Highside, Lowside. My name is Zack. I'm one of your hosts. The other is sitting right next to me, just 2,500 miles away.
Spurgeon Dunbar is here, ladies and gentlemen. I feel like we still haven't nailed this whole like how the other person has to say their name to establish, the vocal understanding for the podcast audience. But I feel like we're getting there.
Yeah. Agreed. I'm certainly not any good at it. So bear with me, everybody. Eventually, I'll figure it out. Today's podcast, we are talking about the Triumph Trident and the Yamaha MT-09, both of which are brand spanking new in the end of 2020, and neither bike we have ridden. But that's not going to stop us from talking about it.
No, I think that's the beauty of this, right? So these are platform bikes that we have ridden the previous versions of quite extensively. So yep. I think this is going to be a fun episode where we are bringing on Mr. Ari Henning to join us. He has got a lot of experience on these previous models as well. I think between the three of us, we're going to have a lot of fun speculation, and I'm expecting to see a lot of comments rolling in about people and their thoughts on these two new models as well.
We can only hope. Before we kick it off, before we jump in for real, a quick word from our sponsor. Okie doke. We're back, a dirge, and ready to talk about triples.
So I think it's really interesting. So I know that, over the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about these bikes, right? I remember it was like a week and a half ago now, we got the drop on the Yamaha, and you wrote that article. Greaser followed that up with the article about the Triumph Trident and all the specs. I think arguably we probably have more information on the Trident right now than we do on the Yamaha. But I do think that historically, if you've looked at Yamaha's take on a triple versus Triumph's take on a triple, they've been two very distinctly different performing engines.
Yeah, certainly. It's sort of a Beauty and the Beast kind of situation, I think, historically. But I suppose
which one's the beauty and which one's the beast?
Well, I'm just gonna have to listen to the whole podcast to find out. I think it's probably pretty clear to people which one's the beauty and which one's the beast. But I guess before we jump all the way into that and we invite our good friend Ari Henning into this conversation, we should say that this is all happening in the context of new bikes being dropped. We're talking about the Trident and the MT-09 because we think it's an interesting dynamic between the two bikes, between Yamaha and Triumph, so on and so forth. But there are lots of other things happening, and in future podcasts, we'll probably cover that as well. This is the time of year usually when EICMA and or Intermot is happening at the end of the year, and lots of new bikes are getting dropped. We've learned about the Multistrada V4 and
I think technically with the way that this podcast is going to release, EICMA should have happened 4 days ago. If my math is correct, and I'm not a math whiz, Zach, I'll promise you that, but EICMA should have happened 4 days ago. So it's a brave new world of how we're getting this information. And what I really like about this, Zach and I have had a lot of fun trying to revision, what we could turn this podcast into. And I think that some of the topical, news hits as they're happening, we're not getting these big shows the way that we have in years past. So people are just rolling stuff out with like, here's a press sheet, here's a spec sheet. They're going to be in dealership floors in 4 months. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this information and how new models continue to be released over the next, I would say, 6 to 12 months. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, hopefully it's 6 to 12 months of podcast fodder if we're lucky.
I mean, based on some of these new models that we're seeing, I don't want to give it away. I want to get Ari on the phone right now because I think I do want to jump right into this, and I'm already tempted to like throw out MSRPs and spec sheet facts and all that stuff. So I think normally we would like to probably go back and forth a little bit more. I would ask you what you were doing. You would ask me what I was doing. I would tell you something about dirt bikes and you'd pretend to be interested, and you would tell me something about delivering pizza and I would pretend to care. But let's just get right into it.
Yeah, agreed. Let's get Ari on the phone. Let's start talking about this. I will just say, even though you don't care, what is in my garage right now, my current assignment is a 2020 Yamaha MT-09. That's the last motorcycle that I rode. So
you've got very specific experience. I will say the motorcycle that I have in my garage right now is a 2010 Street Triple R. That Brett Walling, our boss, Zack and I both answer to Mr. Brett Walling. He's been kindly letting me store it there in my garage for him over the past 2 years. So yeah, that's one of the previous models that I've got experience with in this list.
The point is, we are just more than prepared. So it's time to bring in Mr. Prepared himself, Ari R. Henning.
Now, while Ari's jumping on this horn, keep in mind that this is a podcast as well as a YouTube video. So if you're listening to this, you can type in RevZilla wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Also, we have a winner, Zach. So we have to announce.
Is this when we announce the winner? I wasn't ready. I thought that happened later.
No. We'll bring it back up again. But the winner has to be announced before Ari gets in here, and then he starts talking about the fact that he's building a table that on Instagram, or the fact that he changed a cam or a sprocket and something. So
sure.
Here's how
we can't give away a T-shirt with Ari in the room, because then he'll want it and it'll be a whole thing.
Like the dude's already getting all the leftover T-shirts for his oil racks for all the people that aren't claiming their T-shirts, but. The way this has changed, if you guys have not listened to episode 1, we have Highside, Lowside T-shirts. We are giving them out to folks that leave reviews on Apple iTunes. So we are encouraging you, we are begging you, we are pleading you, leave us a review on Apple iTunes. It helps so much. And honestly, we're doing such a good job, it should be a favorable review. But if it's not, we want to hear the feedback as well, because any of the feedback that you have for us allows us to fine-tune the show. Like we talked about in episode 1, this is the Calvin Ball approach to podcasting. We are changing it as we go. So without any further ado, the winner of the all-new Highside, Lowside T-shirt is Not a Space Odyssey, who wrote in solid podcasts about motorcycling and riding. I'm a new rider, so it's great to get a different perspective. I like it when they disagree with each other. So there you have it, Zach. We should disagree with each other more often.
I don't think we should, actually. See what I did there?
Yeah. You disagreed with me. You son of a... All right, so just so we're clear, Not a Space Odyssey, please shoot us an email to highsidelowside@revzilla.com, and we'll get your information. We'll send you out a free T-shirt. If you are friends with notaspaceodyssey.com and he's not listening to this podcast, you should let him know that he won a free T-shirt.
Absolutely. What could be better? But seriously, thank you for the review. It really helps us out, and hopefully more people will be winning more T-shirts in no time flat.
So now, let's bring Ari onto the show.
Seriously this time.
Look at this handsome son of a... My God. Unlike Zach and I, you actually shave, you clean up pretty nicely.
Yeah, well, fresh haircut, and I can't actually grow a beard, so I don't really have a choice there.
You can. What do you call? Tell everyone what you call your beard when it does grow out.
It's like a little bamboo forest. It's so sparsely populated. Like we'll go on a filming trip, and we'll be out in the field for a week or 10 days, and I come back, and it's just like this pathetic little. It's like a prepubescent wisp of hair on my chin. It's not flattering.
It's funny because they're like thick, burly hairs. There just aren't very many of them.
There's just not very many of them. That's why we call it the bamboo forest. Yeah,
that's right.
For those of you listening on the podcast and not viewing on YouTube, you're really missing out on the imagery that's happening right now at this experience.
2 long-haired, bearded men and 1 short-haired, clean-shaven man.
Exactly. Moving on from beards, much as I would obviously love to talk about that ad nauseum, we are here to talk about the Triumph Trident and the Yamaha MT-09.
Yeah,
is that what we're talking about?
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Good topics. I like it.
Yeah. So just so we can catch you up to speed, Ari, over the past 2 weeks, Yamaha has introduced a new update to the MT-09, which I'm sure you read about on Common Tread because Zack wrote a fantastic piece. Andy Greaser wrote a piece on the Triumph Trident. I think that we arguably have a little bit more information on the Trident at this point. But either way, all 3 of us have ridden previous versions of these bikes, and none of us have actually ridden these new bikes. So it's going to be kind of a fun conversation about what we think.
Previous version of a Trident? I wasn't around in the late 60s, nor was I riding motorcycles in the mid 90s, at least on street bikes.
That's actually a really good point. And we should start with an explanation of where these bikes are derived from and where they're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, the Trident's got a long history.
It does. So the MT-09 is a little bit simpler, I would argue. Debuted in late 2013 as a 2014 model, 847cc inline triple, bit of a thunderbolt in the industry, $7,990 when it was new in 2014, like 105 horsepower, low 400 foot-pounds. It was cheap.
Yep.
It was fast. It was rowdy. It was brawny. And that essential bike has been sort of like tweaked and evolved over the past, what is that, 7 years?
So like two iterations? Is this the third?
This is the third iteration.
This is the third, yeah. So it was updated in 2017. There was no chassis updates or anything. It just got LED lights and traction control, and they did some suspension
the fork,
stuff.
yeah. They manipulated the
I think the
but
bigger,
same frame, same engine, all that jazz.
I think
but the Trident.
I think the bigger number to keep in mind there, though, as we talk about this. So I know that I think the claimed horsepower, not official horsepower. The claimed was like 115, but the torque was actually like 65 foot-pounds of claimed torque. And the biggest thing there is that that's really what that bike became known for, was how oomphy it was compared to the way that Triumph approached the triple at the time.
That's why it went to that MT, Master of Torque name.
Master of
I
Torque.
didn't know that's what the MT stood for.
You didn't know that's what it stood for?
I
That's what they called
learned
it in
something
Europe.
new today.
Master of Torque. It is a pretty lame name.
Yeah, it was the previously, like when it debuted, of course, RevZilla. Fuzz 9.
Yeah.
But then they adopted the global naming convention of MT for the naked bike and then Tracer for the...
Which is a general rule I appreciate. It's always super frustrating when people in Europe
Agreed.
are like, why do you call it that? And we're like, I don't know, because we're like not as cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's just more, I think as we move into a global market, it's more confusing when you're like, oh, I have an FZ09 review, and you're like, well, wait a second, isn't that the same? And you're like, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So they've gotten their ducks in a row from that standpoint. But the new MT-09 is exciting for a bunch of reasons that we'll get into, not least of which the frame is new, the swing arm's new, the engine's new, it's bigger now, plus the whole restyle mumbo jumbo. However, quick history
bike.
on the Trident. Is, as we said, a lot more complicated because it's a bike that it's a name that they're sort of digging up from the dredges of history, right?
Yeah. So if you look at was it Ari might know this better than I do, but I think the Trident was early 70s.
68 to 75, as I recall. Yeah, and also it was sold as the BSA Rocket 3.
Yep,
that's right. That's where the whole Rocket 3 name came from. Same thing.
Contemporary of the CB750, so it was like OG superbikes.
I would say arguably, though, the Trident that we are talking about is more of a namesake than anything else to that version of the bike. I would say that this version of the bike probably has more in line with what we know as the Street Triple, which debuted in 2009 in Triumph's lineup.
Right, and that was the essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, the 675 Daytona 675 engine that they sort of made a naked bike out of, and then detuned, retuned, all that mumbo jumbo, which turned into a really successful model. So successful, in fact, that it now by far overshadows the Daytona, which is only available in that goofy Moto 2.
765, right?
Yeah, 765. But it has a 765 engine, which they use an iteration of in Moto 2. But now the Street Triple is this whole line of its own. It has 3 different versions, and
so a quick little history there, because that's kind of where I did a little bit of kind of research before this, because it was interesting when I researched for the 765 Street Triple RS, but. So 2009 came out. It was about 105 horsepower was what they were claiming, roughly around like 50 foot-pounds of torque. And then as it moved through, that's when you saw the R version come out in 2010 with the updated, nicer adjustable suspension. And then it was 2 years ago now, so 2018 is when they moved it to the 765 engine. And that kind of, then all of a sudden it was like 3 different versions. Each version made different horsepower, different torque.
different cams.
And it's interesting because the price of the Street Triple when it was first introduced in 2009 was right around $7,900.
Was it really that affordable?
Wow, how about that?
What a cheap way to get a triple.
Yeah, seriously. Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that Triumph is doing that now, because the Street Triple has turned into this like middleweight flagship, basically, right? I mean, that Street Triple RS is decorated with basically everything all the tech, all the high spec components, whereas it seems like the new Trident is definitely aimed at kind of a more entry level market. It's pared down, which is so interesting, I think, because that's basically what Yamaha did in 2014 model year with the the FZ09. Now
But the
MT-09
FZ09 was an all-new engine. I mean, that was an all-new bike, whereas it seems like with this Trident, it's a new chassis and whatnot, but the engine is clearly, is it a derivative of the 675 or is it a derivative of the 765?
So it's a derivative of the 675.
Yes, and it's a version that we've never, so actually it was funny because there were a bunch of people, when we did the little news piece on YouTube, there were a bunch of people that came back and they're like, because it's a 660 engine. And they're like, we've had this forever. This isn't a new engine. We've never had it in America. So
it's an A2 engine?
Yes, it's
originally.
You can knock it down so it's A2 compatible. But my apologies to all the European folk out there who got mad because we weren't overly familiar with this. It's not an engine that we ever had in America.
So forgive us.
Yeah, sorry that we're the bigger market. I'll only bring that up a couple times.
It's true.
The point that I was trying to make before, though, that I think was interesting with what Yamaha did with that FZ09 was they basically undercut the Street Triple at that. The Street Triple had grown into this semi-premium product, and Yamaha said, well, what if we just build a brawny triple and we sell it for less than you can get a Street Triple for? And people went kind of gaga for it, right? It was a bit of a thunderbolt in the industry. It was a super
popular,
dynamic bike, popular.
It.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's funny that now the MT-09 has grown, and now MT-09 has traction control, and now the new one has slide control, and it has LED lights, and it has all the stuff. And now Triumph has sort of gone back to the drawing board and said,
changed positions. And now let's make it really basic,
but
more affordable.
They're basically making the exact same bike the Street Triple was 11 years ago. Is kind of what they're doing here, which I always think is funny.
Retro style. It's more in they're calling it a roadster because it is the triple engine, but in my mind, aesthetically and even in the namesake, very much comes from their classic lineup, just like they did with the Bonneville and the Thruxton and the Street Twin. Like it exists in that category in my mind because of the aesthetic.
I do want to take this opportunity this was one of the readers' comments that came through. So the comment was from Vroom Vroom, was his name, on the Triumph train brings a triple to the popular middleweight street class. Vroom Vroom says, I'm so confused. Is this replacing the 765? Will they both coexist? Wouldn't this cannibalize the 765? Is it introduced to compete in a middleweight street segment, but the 675 or the 765 is already doing that? So it does sound like there is some confusion about where this is going to sit.
But there's a huge price gap and obviously a style gap. There's a $2,600. I think the Street Triple R is like 10.6, and this is going to be 8,000. So that's a big price jump. And also
you just gave it away. We didn't even talk about, like, you just threw that out there like it was just some arbitrary number.
I wasn't privy to the earlier part of the conversation. You guys haven't said that it's going to be only $8,000. That's pretty fantastic.
$7,995. $7,995.
Exactly. So $5 more than the FZ09 was when it came out in 2014. I just think there's so much.
Sounds like a ripoff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically the same price as that bike was. I just think that part of it is super interesting. But to answer Vroom Vroom's question, yes, it will coexist with the 765 engine. And the reason it will coexist with the 765 engine is because they have different goals in mind, right?
Exactly.
The 660 triple is supposed to be sleeve down, a little bit more tame, a little bit more accessible, both from a rider experience and a financial standpoint. Whereas the 765 has grown into, like I said, this middleweight flagship that, with an engine that's used in a GP paddock, and it's a really, really fancy bike, even though displacement wise, they're not that far apart.
But I think it's important to note that a lot of people see displacement and they don't realize that there's a pretty big power difference here too. If you're looking at the RS, it's like it's like claimed 121 horsepower, whereas the Trident is claiming right around 80 horsepower, which is much friendlier for that middleweight, entry level segment. Someone that might have started off for a year or two on a small 300 or 400, they want to bump up to something now. This is priced accordingly to compete more with, I would say, like a Z650 and MT-07, but is more performance oriented than what we're seeing out of those bikes.
It's sort of backfilling with what the Street Triple lineup has become, because that has become flagship, and because it has advanced in price and performance and tech, they're sort of backfilling the gap that was left by the Street Triple becoming higher spec, and now they've got something so people can get into a triple at a cheaper price.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much more technology in this Trident also than compared to a Z650 or an MT-07. Agreed.
Yeah, that seems like that's just a factor of the times. Like that stuff's available now. That technology, the IMUs, the ECUs.
Let's touch on this for a second. So Zach and I were talking about this the other day. Why are we? So I guess my question here is, why? I think there's probably people in the audience saying, well, if the Street Triple is more performance oriented, maybe you should be comparing that against the MT-09. But really, where I think this conversation started was the MT-09 started at that $7,900 price point. That was supposed to be that mid-level option that wasn't competing in this high performance category. But now what you're seeing is the MT-09. What's the MSRP on the MT-09, Zach?
94.
94, yeah.
So
it's gone up a little bit.
That's gone up a little bit. It's also now much tech heavier. You just mentioned technology, Zach, but like it's got a 6-axis IMU. It's got 3 stages of traction control. I don't understand what they were trying to say about the braking. It's got some kind of a electronic braking.
Yeah, proportioning valve for front and rear, which has historically not been a good feature in my opinion. It's usually pretty distracting.
Agreed. But it does have they're claiming it has the slide control system that was debuted on the 2015 R1, which was a pretty excellent piece of technology. I don't really know why the MT-09 needs
maybe
that,
because they made the wheelbase shorter, so when it starts to slide, it's going to slide faster.
I hope it's not for like any sort of actual practical reason. That would be kind of scary. One thing that I don't want to neglect to talk about is before we started recording, everybody, just so you know, Ari and Spurgeon, got kind of spooled up on which bike was prettier and which bike was uglier, and they started arguing over that. So we don't want to neglect to talk about that.
But it's a big factor.
This is actually a great spot to take a quick 60-second break. So we need to jump in, get a word from our sponsor Motul, but when we get them right back, we're going to talk about who's right, who's wrong. Spoiler alert, it's me, not Ari. We'll see you in 60 seconds. Oh, so we are back, and Ari apparently thinks that I'm wrong. So
just to be clear here,
I mean, it's a subjective argument. So you can't. We can both be right.
No, that's not how this works. Welcome to Highside, Lowside. No one knows.
Spurgeon's always right.
Yeah. If I know you guys, you're both wrong. The point I'd like to mediate for a second.
Let me add him.
Spurgeon's contention was that the tail on the new Trident is lovely, and
Really?
Ari thinks that it's terrible.
Well, that's because
right?
I'm pretty sure Ari's getting some kind of a kickback from Yoshimura fender eliminators, and I think he's sitting here saying that like he wants a bike that you have to put a fender eliminator on, where Triumph is doing that for you.
It's got a fender on the swing arm that also needs to be eliminated because it's heinous. It's what the MT-09 had last year, which I've never been a fan of. Why are you adding unsprung weight? That is a terrible idea from a performance perspective. Don't do that. Yeah. And also the tail section, it's just it's like bulbous and it's got weird curvatures to it. I like an angular racy tail.
Here's the deal. I'm not sitting here arguing about where they put the license plate or any of that. I'm saying.
I'm not arguing. I'm stating things. I'm stating facts.
No, it's not fact. What I'm saying is that tail piece, first of all, it looks great. You don't have to buy a fender eliminator kit now. It's all svelte. I love the color option where it's like the red undertail part of it. It looks cool.
I mean, the colors are cool. It's just the shape that I have a problem with. But that's not saying that the Yamaha is any more attractive.
Yeah, the Yamaha is arguably the ugliest bike out there in the market right now.
It's been getting worse with every update. They keep making it more and more mechatronic.
Yeah. So
it's weird.
It's remarkable how Yamaha, like when it first came out, people were kind of like, I don't know if I, and then the second one came out and they were like, okay, it's like, and then every MT that's come out is just sort of like surprises everyone a little bit with how quirky and weird it looks. And this new MT-09 is just exactly.
So I would say
it's a great face for a podcast.
And it goes right back into the top comment on the article that got upvoted the most times was simply from Faisal Itani. I don't know if I'm
always fun trying to pronounce those names.
Yeah. And all he says was, "Wow, that's one ugly bike," and it literally has the most, upvotes. And I have defended Yamaha for so long. I know when the FC10, which eventually became the MT10 came out, Lance hated it. It was ugly. It was horrible. I love the high vis wheels and the weird looking face and all of it. And I am having a harder, much like Zach just said, I'm having a harder and harder time defending it. And when I saw the photos for this one, I was like, I'm out. I'm done. Like,
I can't do it. Sorry, I got nothing for you. The good news is it's probably going to be a lot of fun to ride. If past models are any indication, it won't matter once you're behind the handlebar because it's going to be all hooting and hollering and having a great time.
So let's actually talk about that. So Zach was saying the other day that you've done a lot of modification work. Was it on an FZ09?
Yeah, it was a first-year FZ09 that I was trying to make handle because it had pretty vague steering and obviously had brake issues, and the suspension was problematic from the get-go and has been. And yeah, I made some progress, but at one point, Zack and I rode it back to back with a then current street triple, and it was just not up to snuff. Not even close.
Not even close. And
Yeah.
I just think it's super interesting and worth stating that Ari spent a lot of time. He's underselling it a little bit. He spent a lot of time on the suspension of that bike. You upgraded the fork. You adjusted it constantly.
Yep.
Didn't you put a ZX6 shock on it? Did you? Or
no, I went with a Cogent Dynamic shock, or maybe it was a JRI. I tried a bunch. No, you're right. I did early on. I tried to do really budget stuff.
You just bought an old shock on eBay from a sport bike, thinking that it was just the componentry, which is pretty cool, and tried that upgrade. But the point is, a lot of effort. You put a lot of effort into that bike, and then we rode. And when it was in its best state, you had Pirelli super courses on it. Like, we tried everything, and we took it on that twisty road. And
it just wasn't there. It just didn't have the edge grip, man. It didn't have the front end feel when you're at full lean. You could never really push it that hard.
Yep. And so I think that it bears reiterating that this new MT-09 is they say the frame is 50% stiffer laterally, and the fork tubes are shorter. It's like they seem to have made it a little bit more like they're trying to make it a little bit tighter and less loosey-goosey.
They don't really explain what those changes are for, but we can hope and assume that they're somehow improvements.
That was my biggest question when I was reading through the Yamaha press release. Was like, they changed the suspension, but they didn't tell us how they changed the suspension at all. So I think it's still we're still very up in the air on that.
Yeah. Totally. The spec is basically the same.
We always assume that a change is good, but they could be like, I don't know, we took a spring out of one leg because it's cheaper.
That actually reminds me, one time I was racing vintage bikes in Canada when I was a teenager, and I was racing this clapped out old CB 350 that someone had basically given me, and I went to tech inspection, and the fork seal was leaking, and the guy was like, well, I can't approve your bike to go on the track with oil coming out of the fork. And I was like, crap. So I went back to the pit, and I decided I'll just drain the fork oil out of this fork,
and it'll stop leaking,
and then I'll get it teched. Yeah, because it won't leak, And then I just raced it that way the whole weekend, and it was fine. So just
that's because you've got tires and flexi wheels and a flexi chassis. The suspension's not actually doing that much.
Yeah, and like 22 horsepower or whatever. So anyway, but yeah, I think it's important to. It is important to note that Yamaha does seem to be pushing in that direction, and that's something that is not necessarily clear, I don't think, with the Trident anyway.
The Trident is it seems a bit more basic, right? It's a USD fork, but there's no adjustment to it. The rear shock is just preload. I
will say though, historically Triumphs handle really well. It doesn't matter if it is a 700-pound Rocket 3 or if it's any one of their models. They always their street bikes are just kind of the benchmark for how a bike should handle.
Oh, I agree.
So I have high expectations for this one.
I'm actually it's funny though, because I'm already like, I wonder if they're going to do an R version where they do the upgraded specs.
Oh my God,
like, throw an extra $1,000 at it.
No, probably. I mean, they got a bunch of Ohlins and Brembo kicking around in boxes back there. So
I mean, we should. I think, especially people in our position, should try to pump the brakes and try to accept this bike for what it is. Right?
Have you guys talked about the weight yet? I don't want to blow any specs out of the water, but
let's dive right into the specs, please, by all means.
417 pounds.
They're both
fully fueled.
They both are. They're both the MT-09 and the new Trident are claimed 417 wet.
Yeah. And I was kind of just comparing it. Like, the Street Twin in my mind is a beautiful entry level bike from Triumph, and I think that weighs 40 or 50 pounds more than what they're claiming the Trident will weigh.
I mean, that's a lunker of an engine though, right? The Speed Twin,
big 900.
Oh, you said the Street Twin, yeah, but still a bit of a lunker of an engine. I think that's something that Trident's going to benefit from, right? Is the sort of engine and chassis know-how that they're going to take from what they know about that small triple, and it's bound to just sort of lean in that slightly more performance direction, no matter what, than something like a Bonneville.
When are we supposed to see this bike? When's the press launch? When are they going to be in dealerships?
End of the year is supposed to be a press launch, but I've got my doubts.
Yeah. Probably not flying over the Atlantic for that one.
Yeah, no. So the rumor is that there's a press launch coming towards the end of the year. I would expect it to be the beginning of next year. They really don't have too much on this. And again, it kind of goes, Zack and I were talking in the beginning of this episode about how normally EICMA would have happened about 4 days ago, and we're just not sure about launches and press releases and when we're getting press rides on this stuff. But I do think that they'd be, a fool not to try and get it out for early 2021.
Totally. They got to hit that spring sales rush.
Yeah, the way that sales have been happening, we've seen a huge increase in sales in 2020 in general in the motorcycle segment, which is great for motorcycling. But now it's like, let's get some of these new products out, especially something that's coming in at $7,900. I mean, Triumph, you're talking about the Street Twin. The Street Twin is almost
$8,000.
What is it?
It's $8,000. Let's just call it.
I don't think it is.
Shall we?
I don't think it is.
He's saying the Trident is $8,000.
Oh, yeah. But I'm saying, but the Street Triple,
$79.95.
Yeah, that's $8,000.
Okay, but the Street Twin,
the Speed is like $2,000 more.
The Street Twin is almost $10,000, I think. So this is now going to be the most affordable bike in Triumph's lineup.
So
is that true? It's the cheapest one.
Yeah,
we're talking about how it might impact sales of the Street Triple, but truthfully, it might impact sales of the Street Twin in that lineup because those bikes don't have the technology that this one offers, and it's going to be cheaper.
So let me ask you that. So do you think? So we were talking about looks earlier, right? Do you think that the same buyer that's looking at a Street Twin is also going to be looking at a Trident based on aesthetics?
Yes, 100%. I think it very much falls in that same category. It's using the throwback name. It has the round headlight. It has the round tank. It obviously has a unique approach to the style, but there's no doubt in my mind that it is a modern classic and not a roadster as they have categorized it. So,
Yeah. To me, it's the XSR 700, XSR 900 approach, right? Like they put a round headlight on a twin spar frame and a modern chassis. So it's like they're kind of phoning it in, I think. It's not like when Triumph sets out to make a modern classic historically,
they do a really good job.
Exactly.
They made injectors that you couldn't tell weren't carburetors. Like you'd sit there and stare at it and be like, "Are you sure it doesn't have a float bowl?"
Totally. And they make, they have their round blinkers and like all this stuff. And the Trident is not that. It's got a round headlight because that's what people like these days, but it's not really. They're not leaning so hard into it that they went so far as to make. I think the retro
XSR
chassis
is a great comparison. And frankly, we're talking about the new MT-09, but like the XSR 900 is a more direct comparison.
Arguably, yeah.
But they didn't just issue a press release announcing that as an update.
It's not a hot topic to talk about.
Exactly.
Well, actually, so that's something I want to ask you guys too. We talked about, is the Trident really? Is it more of a Z650 MT-07? CB 650R kind of.
The whole class is getting very muddled.
It is. It's getting, which is I think kind of fun actually.
It's a very popular class.
Yes. But so here's my question to you, experts in the industry. What would you like to see? What are you expecting to see? What else might we see in the next few months from these brands? Like, is there something that seems obvious to either of you that might debut?
We've got the new Aprilia lineup. The 660 platform is coming out, and that's
true. That'd be a 660 210, right?
Is at the upper level of this kind of middleweight twin triple class we're talking about. But we've got the 210 coming out in 2021.
And what do you expect?
And that'll probably be
11,000.
That'll probably be cheaper than the R660, right?
Yeah.
Presumably be cheaper and presumably be lighter since it won't have bodywork. But other than that, they don't really need to change much except maybe the top triple clamp to put handlebars on it.
Yeah. Yep. And so what would that would be? The R660 is 11.4.
It is 11.3.
11.3.
And it's a 659cc parallel twin, but it's doing the 270 crank, so it's got some good feel to it. And then just like as much technology as you would see on an RSV4 or a top of line Panigale, it's just completely laden.
So maybe 10.5 for a 210, probably
potentially
10 grand. No. So still like to Triumph's credit, a lot more.
Yes.
Potentially.
Good point.
I'm gonna let this part of the conversation slide because Ari just rode the RS660. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole of hypothetical because we have another episode coming up later in the season where we actually spend an entire episode going on what was released at the end of this year, what we're expecting for 2021. So I don't want to go too far down that path.
Right. Sorry, Dad.
Yep.
Sorry, Dad. That's I didn't mean to go down the wrong path there. I was stupid.
You were, and I hope you learn from this and you don't do it again. But you will because you constantly,
stupid.
Well, you're like a teenager. You like to push the envelope of how much you can get away with, and I just have to sit here and reel you in.
So I think that it's fun to we do as we talked about. The three of us have a lot of experience with street triples, with speed triples, with
all the triples.
FZ09s and MT-09s, and all that jazz. It's fun to speculate about what we think these bikes are going to be like to ride, and I guess I'd like to be more specific about that. We feel like the Trident 80 horsepower and it's going to be a little bit more tame and smaller. The MT-09 is probably going to feel largely the same, right? Is that what you're expecting? That's kind of what I'm expecting.
I mean, it's a bigger motor, and we don't know necessarily why they made the motor bigger, but I think we keep talking about the Trident horsepower, but the Trident torque is probably more what they're promoting, right? Isn't it supposed to have 80 or 90% of its peak torque from some ridiculously low RPM?
Yeah, but it's 40. I wrote the specs down. I did my homework on this ripped off piece of paper.
What a pro.
Yeah.
So what is it, mid-40s?
Yeah, so it's 47 foot-pounds of torque is claimed, but 90% of peak torque is available from 3,600 RPM to 9,700 RPM. So it's going to be a huge usable window.
That's not a curve. That's like a nice straight line across the
But keep in mind, the MT-09 was the same way. It's a big flat torque curve on the previous one. It's just much higher.
The triples are so great. Yeah, you get the high revving personality and performance of a multi, but you also get like a lot of low end and mid range. It's a good compromise. It's a great platform.
I thought it was interesting.
Go ahead, Zach.
I thought it was interesting that I noticed that the red line on the Trident is quite low, and I feel like that's an indication of like the engine itself is pretty small, but red line is like 11 or something, or 10 and change.
We've also got
like
super high service intervals, which that might be part of, because lower revs means less stress. And it says 10,000 mile service interval, but it doesn't specify what that is. If that's an oil change, then holy
it's an oil change.
So if that's valve clearances, then that's not so good.
No, based on Triumph's other bikes in their line, because I was actually digging this up, because I do think that one of the notable comparisons here is really going to be service intervals. The outgoing MT-10 or MT-09, the service intervals were 4,000 miles for oil changes. And with the Triumph, it's 10,000 miles for oil changes. And I think the valve interval is 20,000.
Really? Who's going to go a whole year without changing their oil?
Well, you're assuming that they're riding 10,000 miles in a year,
which most people do not do.
It's still 10,000 miles or every year, if I'm correct.
Okay.
That's so pretty remarkable.
But I do think, so you're looking at better service intervals with the Triumph, and you're looking at a 2-year unlimited mile warranty versus a 1-year warranty with the Yamaha.
Does the warranty cover flipping it over backwards when you're trying to do sick nooners?
That's where your insurance comes into play. That's when you call your insurance company up and you're like, hey, I was minding my own business, riding down the road at 25 miles an hour.
And then gravity just totally reversed itself.
Yeah.
I want to get a Triumph engineer on the show to be like, how do you get away with a 10,000 mile service interval? Because that's insane. Like, obviously it's synthetic oil, which we can assume is Castrol because that's what they always use. But that is a long time for an oil to do its job and to not break down and have problems.
Maybe they're just banking on people doing it once a year and only riding a few thousand miles.
Probably. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't be willing to run at 10,000 miles between changes.
Well, I think there's also a question about how this bike is being used. I'm guessing that the average rider buying the Trident is probably not running it to redline and taking this to the track and abusing it. They're probably doing a little bit more just like around town stuff.
Well,
that's a lot of miles.
Yeah, it is a lot of miles.
Yeah, but Triumph's been doing that for a while. That's nothing new.
That's the whole point of me bringing up the red line, though, is that the red line is low because they are expecting it to not make very much power, and they're expecting the people to not care, and that it's a completely different. It's not just like torque figures and horsepower figures. It's them saying like, this is us going like this.
Yeah.
Easy, everyone calm down.
Easy, everybody. Everybody.
But Triumph is, but again, I have a 2005 Bonneville T100 that's got almost 80,000 miles on it now. That bike makes like 55 horsepower. There was a company out of Southern California. It was called South Bay Triumph. They were taking those 865 engines and they were doing land speed bikes with them, and they were getting well over 100 horsepower out of those engines. They were horribly unreliable at that amount of power, but you could get it there. So I think Triumph has this long history of saying we're going to
massively understressed engines.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's wise for sure.
Spurgeon, are you aware that both Zack and I have raced Triumph Thruxtons?
I did not know that. Oh, I knew Zack did, because Zack did it down at Barber when I read the article.
Yeah, I did. Yep. Yeah, they used to be a pretty popular class. I don't know if it's so popular anymore, but those bikes, talking about making power, like they made pretty good power, and they're actually a lot of fun to hustle around a racetrack.
Yeah.
I was impressed with the Triumph Thruxton race bike for sure.
Certainly, it was a good time, if nothing else.
That was my first track day ever. I was working for a dealership back in 2000 and I think it was 2012, and we went down to Barber for like a big Triumph festival, and I got to do my first track day on one of the race prep Thruxtons that they had at Barber.
Awesome.
Yeah,
That's
very
a
cool.
Great introduction.
Yeah.
So back to the task at hand here. I want to try and draw some more stuff out of you guys that might not make any sense, but someone comes to you, hypothetically, and they say, I've been riding, I had a Ninja 400, and then I got a Yamaha, or I got a Kawasaki Z650, and I put a pipe on it, and like I've been riding around a lot, and I dig that bike. It's super fun, but I want to upgrade, and I'm thinking either 2021 Triumph Trident or 2021 Yamaha MT-09. What do you tell them?
I'll let our guest go first.
Well, it's a common question we've answered about the Street Triple versus the MT-09, and I think that these two bikes kind of broaden that gap between what I would describe as rambunctious and rowdy, which is what the MT-09 presumably is going to be. It's going to have a harder hit of power. It's going to want to do wheelies. It's going to just kind of be more of an urban assault vehicle versus this new Trident, which I assume, as we've discussed, to be kind of a calmer, more sedate, enjoyable, refined machine. So yeah, I guess it depends which direction you want to go. Do you want to start riding faster and being more of a hooligan, in which case Yamaha, or do you want to kind of just progress a little bit with a little bit more performance and tech, in which case go with the Triumph?
Yep. I'd say that's a good breakdown. I think where I'm going with this, I think experienced riders are going to appreciate the Trident but not be excited by it. And I think that's what the MT-09 has done from the get-go. It's arguably dangerously fast and torquey for a beginner, but it's small and compact and affordable. But from the beginning, basically everyone that's ridden that bike was like, "Whoa, damn!"
Well, I think it speaks a lot, because I've gotten the question a lot where it's like, "Oh, well, Yamaha's making a triple and Triumph's making a triple," but there's two different approaches here. Yamaha gave you like peak torque right out of the gate. Like that bike just wants to smash you in the face at 2,000 RPM.
Zero throttle response.
And then you have the Triumph, and the Triumph, while we talked earlier about having a nice big flat torque curve, or plateau rather, it still needs to be spun up a little bit. It still isn't coming on. It's not until you get to like 3,000 or 4,000 RPM where you really start to feel it want to pull. It's all about mid-range, and then especially with the new Street Triple line, it's going much more towards the top end of the power spectrum. Whereas I think, much like Ari just said, this one, the Trident's going to bring everything down a little bit, but it's still not going to be smack you in the face with a 2x4 right off at 2,000 RPM. It's going to allow you to spin up.
Triumph has historically done a really good job with throttle response.
Yeah. Oh my God. They're absolutely the benchmark there as well. Basically, any bike, the fueling is so good.
So the Yamaha triples have been pretty abysmal.
So that was my question. Do you think, based on the fact that this is now going to a throttle by wire system, or it's a new throttle by wire system,
a new throttle? They just got rid of the cables.
So my question is do we think that whole throttle issue is going to be worked out in this newest iteration from Yamaha?
I'll go first. Absolutely not.
For those of you listening, I am shaking my head very slowly left to right, because part of it, Spurgeon, is not simply fueling. Part of it is driveline lash. And Triumph has, the reason those triples have that whine, that classic whine, is because they have a straight cut primary that they have set to ridiculously tight tolerances, versus the Yamaha has play at the primary and the clutch basket and the transmission and the final drive. So that's the other part of it that exacerbates it. It's got crummy throttle response, but then it's exacerbated by the fact there's a whole lot of driveline lash between the primary and the rear wheel, which the Triumph does not have.
Do you think that's going to be cleaned up with this new version?
No,
I don't think so, because that's really expensive stuff to clean up, because that comes back to machining, and they've already made all of the tooling to make all of those parts.
Which, interesting sidebar here, if you're ever in a Yamaha dealership, or you see a brand new MT-09 or Tracer 900, check the chain
gonna be
tension.
tight. It's going to be so tight.
It's going to be super tight, because
they're
they
trying
don't
to
want any more
eliminate
lash
a little bit
in the driveline.
Yep, they're trying to Band-Aid it, but in order to fix it, they'd have to go all the way back to the drawing board, and broaching sprockets and cogs for the transmission is very expensive stuff.
So I mean, it is the transmission is updated, and they did some stuff. So who knows? Maybe
they
surprised.
did. I mean, we're all making huge assumptions here, and we actually have no idea.
Yeah,
yeah, totally. I love it.
We're just making stuff up. None of us have ridden the bikes. And I think it's interesting because we're basing a lot of our opinions on the previous versions of these bikes, which we've all ridden and had good experiences with in varying ways. I do want to kind of come to a nice conclusion here before we kick Ari off the show and bid him adieu. So we've got a Triumph Trident that's coming in at $79.99, $8,000.
Thank you.
It's going to be making about 80 horsepower, roughly around 47 foot-pounds of torque. It is going to have ride modes and traction control and ABS and a TFT dash. It's going to be
and GoPro connectivity, apparently.
Yeah, because that's what the world needs.
I don't know. Exactly.
But it's going to have maybe some more budget components when it comes to the suspension, and possibly not nearly the adjustability that you might get with the MT-09, which is now up in price to around $9,500. Is that fair, Zack?
$94, yep.
$9,400.
$94, yeah.
Adjustable suspension, 3 modes of traction control, TFT dash, 115 plus horsepower, 65 plus foot-pounds of torque. We're assuming it's more power than the previous engine.
Yeah, quick shifter.
Quick shifter, that's a great point.
Bidirectional, right?
Are these, yes. Are these bikes going to be at the same level, or is it they're going to be competing for the same audience? Are they going to be different? What are your final thoughts on these bikes?
I think to the extent that someone wants a, $7,500 to $9,500 triple, then yeah. And I think that there's a whole aesthetic conversation because the Yamaha is by all accounts quite ugly, and the Triumph, despite what Ari says about the tail and the swing arm mounted fender, which I think he's right, is kind of ugly. The Triumph is a pretty handsome
it's an attractive
machine.
Bike. Yeah. I'm just picking nits.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that they will be cross-shopped to a certain extent, but I also think that they are going to be different enough that they're not going to step on each other's toes, in my opinion.
Harry?
I do think that in that category of bikes, since these are both potentially going to be someone's first purchase, I think there's a lot of factors there that as experienced riders that have ridden a lot of bikes, we don't take into consideration, aesthetic being a huge one. Yep. Like a lot of people who have never ridden before, they have this dream, this aspiration of what they're going to do and what it's going to be like. And I feel that the aesthetic is a huge factor there. Also, obviously, price, because it is going to be a big investment. If you're a new rider, you're also buying a new helmet, a new jacket. So like you're looking at a much larger sum of money to get involved than just purchasing a bike. So yeah, they are going to be cross shops, I imagine. But as we discussed earlier or mentioned earlier, this category of bike is gotten so broad and varied at this point that it's just 2 more cool options in there. I think it's people got a lot of choices, which is great.
So I would argue that, from my point of view with this, one thing, the aesthetics, I would second that. That's why I asked you earlier about the Street Twin, because when I bought my first bike, I bought the Bonneville because that's the look that I wanted. I didn't look at a Street Triple or anything. I mean, that didn't exist then, but I looked at the bike that I styled, that I liked. The other thing that you said, I don't think this is a beginner bike. You said, beginners arguably are looking at these. I don't think that a beginner should be looking at an MT-09 as a first bike. I think if you are, it's probably arguably the wrong bike. I think the Triumph would probably be more friendly. We don't do the A2 licensing in America, but there's a reason that this bike exists, as an option to knock down the power in other markets. I think that if we were looking at a beginner segment, that would probably be the bike of these two to choose if you're just starting out, although I think neither one is necessarily the best option for you new riders out there. If you're listening to this and you're like, should I buy this as a first bike? I would not, but I think that you're going to see the Triumph be the better seller in the long run, would be my guess, but I could be way off base with that.
Yeah, I think that's you bring me an interesting point, actually, which is important to recognize, I think, and we have not brought up yet, which is that for Yamaha, the MT-09 is not the cheapest bike in the lineup. It's not the beginning of the ladder. There's an R3, an MT-03, an MT-07. There's lots of stuff underneath that you can get. Whereas with Triumph, as you pointed out, Spurge, this is them reaching down.
They're bringing in a new bike that's going to be the most affordable.
Yeah. So and that speaks to the mantra of the two machines, I think, despite the parity in some of the specifications and technology and stuff like that. So it's going to be super interesting.
I'm going to ask one final question because our producer over here is he's giving me this.
This is supposed to be like a 20-minute conversation, right? It's been 44.
But we're having fun, and we're not here to limit. We're not here to limit it, man. So. I just want to for 1 second forget about the MT-09. If you had to choose between the Trident on paper and an MT-07, or like an XSR or XSR 700 or the Cowie 650 for the same price. Which one and you've ridden the other ones, you've only seen this one on paper. Where would you leave the audience with?
Go ahead, Ari.
The Trident, I think, is going to be a great motorcycle. It does not tickle me in any way. I'm excited about it for what it does for the industry and for what it offers as an option to other riders. I am not personally interested in it. So I would probably go with an MT-07. I think that is a super fun bike because you can clutch up third gear wheelies, which is like, what are we on planet Earth to do?
Seriously, third gear wheelies with a bike that size.
Trident's not doing that.
I think that is essentially like, I'm probably a little bit more attracted to the Trident than areas because I typically fall for the the tech and the fancy new design, and I like the round headlight and that kind of thing. But I think the big thing, especially for an experienced rider, is going to be the engine. I think that an MT-07 engine, as kind of like raw and shade tree as it's going to feel compared to the Trident,
that's why it's fun.
Exactly. Yeah. It's that engine is so much fun. It's such a great power plant, especially for a small middleweight bike like that. And I think that's something that I'm interested to see how it actually pans out and what people actually think.
Yeah, I think on paper, my gut reaction is that I was like, I think I would like the Trident. And the more that I thought about this question, I was like, the MT-09 or the MT-07 engine, that parallel twin, is still to this day like one of my favorite middleweight engines in motorcycling.
So
period.
Good.
It's got so much personality. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Out of a parallel twin of all configurations.
Yeah. When people are like, I need something bigger. I need something. I'm like, dude, everybody I know could take an MT-07 and have fun and never need another bike. And like, that would be the perfect street bike for so many people.
Hashtag third gear wheelies.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is pretty much where we've run out of time as far as this discussion goes. It sounds like we could probably talk quite a bit more, but Zach and I actually have to get into viewers' questions, so we're going to have to kick Ari off the show.
No worries, guys. It was fun. I like talking bikes with you, and hopefully do it again soon.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you're wrong when it comes to the aesthetic, but we can't always be right.
Break it up. You two.
I gotta let you win a few of them.
Talk to you soon, Ari.
All right, guys. Bye.
Yep. Okay, we're free of Ari Henning. He doesn't want to have any part of this anyway.
He's so wrong on so many different levels, though. And now that he's gone, I can just keep pointing it out. The tail section doesn't look good. What the hell is? He's sitting here talking about gear tolerances in the engine and drivetrain lash, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. You're nerd. Yeah, nerd.
I think he makes a good point. I think the swing arm mounted fender is a polarizing thing, and I get that he doesn't like it. I think it's kind of like it's weird. I just think it's super interesting that Triumph went that direction when right as Yamaha reverted back away from it. It is so interesting that they were like, just kidding, we're not doing that anymore. And then Triumph, I don't know. Whatever.
I just think it cleans up the look of the tail section. That's all. That's all I was trying to say.
It certainly does. It also, as people all over the Common Tread blog at RevZilla say, the fender, there'll be mud on the underside when I ride up my dirt road, and it's not as practical. I don't think that that kind of fender is as practical. Anyway. We're moving on here to viewer and listener questions. These are sourced from the previous episode of YouTube this time, or you can send an email to highside@revzilla.com, and we might just
pick you,
answer your question.
We get to talk about you and your question. Absolutely.
The first one that I want to bring up, which I think is so much fun, not so much a question as it is a comment, which is probably why I like it. The last episode, this guy commented, Malvina Carabas says, Lance and Spurgeon should have respected viewers and shaved themselves. Both are looking like bozos. Disgrace. Great company, but no culture whatsoever.
So here's what I like about this comment. One, he doesn't talk about you.
Like
you haven't shaved yourself either. And like, I'm assuming there's a language barrier here, because like when I read like shave yourself, I feel like
very graphic.
He's like, well, Spurgeon and Lance didn't give like the whole full body treatment here.
Marvin, you could tell that I'm just so smooth everywhere on my whole body.
If you're listening on the podcast, Zach is taking his shirt off as we speak.
Not all the way. The point is, it is ridiculous that this person wouldn't call me out for also having a beard. I think what it is that you and Lance, you go back and forth with your beards. I've had a beard for like 10 or 12 years now. So I think people just assume that I can't even shave this off my face, and that's just life.
I could understand if, first of all, I don't understand the fact that he left you out of this. What I could understand if he's like, listen, Spurgeon, your hair's down past your shoulders. You look like a damn hippie. Cut your hair. I've heard that comment so many times, and part of me, like, I don't understand how people care so much about how I wear my hair. That's a thing. But what I don't understand in this particular one is that he picks on Lance. Now, if you guys did not see the video of the first episode, Lance's hair is like perfectly cut and like combed and slicked back. He has a very trimmed, like graying beard.
Plus Lance Oliver, he's just a consummate professional. I don't know how you could be mad at Lance for the way he presents himself.
He's wearing a button-down shirt. You and I, like, I'm wearing like a ripped-up V-neck. Like, again, I can understand Malvino Carbasis's, accusations toward me, but picking on Lance Oliver for how he looks, come on.
That's
ridiculous.
One step too far, Malvina.
Anyway,
we do appreciate the comment, even though that
no,
one
we
was
don't.
pretty
We don't
snide.
appreciate that comment. Not at all.
No. I mean, that comment was not particularly, constructive. But moving right along, Spurgeon. Moving.
Highside,
right along.
Lowside. Question number 2 comes in
this one.
from the episode, season 3, episode 1. Can a motorcycle be too cheap? And this is Spiral Illusion. Writes in.
I don't
and
think
says,
that's their given name, by the way.
No, it's his God-given name, Spiral Illusion. His mother was a huge fan of Guns N' Roses in the early 90s. Spiral Illusion says, if someone has experience of riding more than 10,000 miles in less than a year, but his bike or her bike was a 125cc Honda, should he or she be considered as an experienced/intermediate/real rider?
So one of the things I like about this question is it's like a, asking for a friend kind of thing. They're like, if someone had 10,000 miles of experience on a Honda 125 that they got from my uncle's garage, and then you can tell they're clearly asking about themselves.
Old Spiral Illusion is talking about himself here.
Right. Well, I mean, even if they're asking for a friend, I think it's a good question, honestly, because it can be difficult sometimes to gauge your own experience or skill level within the context of motorcycling, especially if I keep saying especially, I don't know why I do that, especially if you are, not someone who rides with a lot of other people, or you don't have a lot of other riding buddies or whatever. So you're not sure what you know, or you're not sure what you don't know. And I think this is a good question. My answer is that yes, you're an experienced rider. If you've ridden a 125cc Honda for 10,000 miles, you've logged some miles, no question about that. What you're not experienced with is all the other stuff in motorcycling, right? You shouldn't assume that you can handle a high horsepower bike on a racetrack if you have that experience. But you should definitely be confident in yourself, because that's a lot of miles to log, especially on a small bike. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So I there's my mind went in two different directions for this, as my mind tends to do. My mind is not very linear. It goes all over the place. So the first area that my mind went is that Lance and I have this conversation a lot when we talk about like track schools or rider training or any kind of taking a lesson, right? So many people that I talk to, they're like, I've been riding for 20 years. I don't need to get better. And it's like, but you've been riding the exact same way for 20 years. You haven't been going to track days. You haven't been taking coaching. You're arguably as good of a rider now as you were 20 years ago. You haven't improved at all. I think that there's a lot of people that get stuck in that rut of saying, well, I rode for 20 years or I rode 10,000 miles. But if you're not improving, if you're just making the same mistakes the whole time because you're not taking any kind of instructional lessons to get better, then you're the same skill set you were 20 years ago. So that brings me to my second point of spiral illusion, is that if you're riding 10,000 miles on your 125cc Honda and you are grinding the pegs off and you are pushing this bike to the max and you can't get any more out of it, then yes, you're experienced at this bike, and now it's time to move up to something else. Like now, once you've mastered that bike, then move up to the next tier.
I would quickly, and I emphasize quickly, I would quickly disagree with you about the, same bike, same roads, same experiences for 20 years and not improving. I do think that we all learn and gain. I've been playing soccer for like 20 years now, and I still get better, even though the fields don't change, the balls don't change. I'm not like changing my environment, but I'm processing new things, and I am learning and getting better at the thing. So I think that, I would disagree that you don't learn when you don't change those things. However, I would very, very much agree with you in saying that if you do change your environment, your machine, your experiences, you will learn so much more. No question.
Are you playing in the World Cup?
Not yet, but like I said, I'm still learning and getting better. So I think at this rate, in another 200 or 300 years, I'll probably get.
But you're learning. When you go out and play soccer with friends or whatever, are you trying harder? I mean, are you practicing? Do you go out and kick a ball around for fun?
Am I trying hard? Yeah, I'm trying hard, man. Come on.
But that's the point. Like you're practicing at soccer. You're going out and you're playing and you're keeping active at it and you're trying to get better. And I think that if a motorcyclist is going out and doing, parking lot drills to practice low speed skills, or they're taking a track day and they're doing, an entry level coaching. Like, that's all I'm saying.
I think that's totally fair. You do have to be in the mindset of wanting to improve and always asking yourself to be a little bit better.
We'll have to come and see you play soccer sometime.
Question,
we should incorporate that in the podcast.
Yeah, well, I'm not playing soccer anymore because you're not allowed to be close to strangers. So I'm almost certainly much worse at soccer than I was a year ago at this point. Last Highside, Lowside question is from Mr. B.
Ooh.
And again, not so much a question.
Oh, this is aimed at you.
I think directed at me.
Oh.
It says they replaced a cruiser lover with a cruiser hater. Frowny face.
That man is sad.
Right. And you're obviously suggesting that I'm on this podcast now, and no more, or less anyway, Joe Zito, no more Lemmy. And I would just like to say that I get accused of hating cruisers a lot. And
is it true?
All I ever
is it true?
try to do... No, it's not. I don't hate cruisers. I think I revert to being an objective reviewer of motorcycles when I ride them, because that's what my job has been for the past umpteen years. And I can't help but come to the conclusion that when it comes to going and stopping and turning and weight and just like every objective measure, cruisers are often just so much worse. But I will not concede that I'm a cruiser hater. I won't, because I think cruisers are fun. I like them. I like cruising on them. I like, doing cruiser things. I don't have any tattoos, I'll admit that. but I don't know. I appreciate them for what they are. I just think that it's just like cruiser folks can be so touchy sometimes. You just say like, I don't know, it weighs 200 pounds more than that other bike that has 20 more horsepower. And they're like, you hate cruisers, which doesn't seem fair. I'm just stating the facts, man. I don't know.
Well, I think that's fair of all of us in the show. I think that it would be unfair to say that we don't have personal bikes that we like riding or personal style of riding that we like. But if I'm testing a cruiser, I test it against other cruisers. I test it against like, hey, this is really good if you want to take a Road King across Texas at 55 miles an hour and, listen to some music and have a nice experience.
Sure.
Yeah. But I do think that there's also a personal element of like, I don't like forward controls. I don't like the pressure on my tailbone. I don't like that seating position. So like, yes, there are certain aspects.
Hi. Hello, my name is Spurgeon Dunbar, and I'm a cruiser hater.
I would never say that. I would never say it. I would say I'm Spurgeon Dunbar, and if I'm going to ride a cruiser, I would like mid controls as opposed to forwards. That I would say.
I think that is fair. I really do, and I think that it's I don't know. I definitely stand by and I'm sure we'll get some comments about this, but it just seems like sometimes folks who ride that kind of bike are just so spiky. Like if I rode a CRF 450L the other day, and I rode it along the city streets, and the seat is just terrible, right? But if you tell like a dirt bike guy, like, oh man, the seat's so uncomfortable on that bike, they'll be like, yeah, it's a dirt bike.
You're not supposed to use it. You're supposed to be standing anyway.
Yeah,
What's
exactly.
the problem?
Like do dirt bike stuff with it. Like I don't care what you think about the seat.
Yeah.
It's for doing a certain thing. But if you say a cruiser is heavy and doesn't make horsepower, people are like, oh my God, he doesn't like my kind of bike. But like, just own it. It is what it is, man. Your bikes are heavy and they're often slow and they're for cruising, and cruising is cool, man. It's all good.
But I see it a lot too with the ADV side of things, where people are like, why would you ever want to take that bike off road? It's too big. It's too heavy. Go buy yourself a dirt bike. I'm like, but that's arguably not what I'm doing with this bike. This bike is fun in a different way. So I think you make a great point there about, what is this bike really aimed at doing?
Right. Well, point being, for Mr. B, leaver of this comment, I can promise you, in my heart of hearts, I am not a cruiser hater. I do enjoy cruisers, and anytime I ride them, I will be honest, which is both good and sometimes bad.
Well, there you have it, folks. The cruiser lover himself, Zack Quartz. If you haven't seen his most recent daily ride, actually probably not the most recent at this point in time, but there was there's a nice Harley Davidson one that he did recently. So if you think that he's a Harley hater or a cruiser hater, you can go watch that video and realize that he is a well-rounded motorcyclist, and that's why we brought him on the show.
Lowrider S. I like the Lowrider S. It's pretty cool.
There you have it. The cruiser hater himself likes the Lowrider S.
I don't know. It's a cool bike, fun bike. I just wish I could bring my lady on the back. So if I was gonna get slightly different bike, I think, because I want a passenger perch.
Ladies and gentlemen,
that's
with
a whole
that
nother
being
podcast.
said, yeah, I feel like you didn't say that once this entire podcast. I feel like your little catchphrase of that could be a podcast in itself.
I know, you're right. That is my catchphrase, and that's the catchphrase for this time around. Which cruiser we would buy? That's a whole nother podcast, people. We're gonna have to come back to that one,
because today we are out of time. And ladies and gentlemen, if you are watching this on YouTube, please make sure to throw your comments down below. We are reading them and we are bringing them on the show and commenting about them. If you want to shoot us an email, if you're listening via podcast, you can always email us at Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com. And if you really want to, Zack, what would you like them to do for us?
And they can also, any of you listening, can go into the Apple iTunes store and leave us a review, which again we know can be a pain in the tail, and we do very much apologize. But the ghost of Steve Jobs is asking you to please leave us a review. It helps us out a great deal from a podcast distribution standpoint, and plus you can let us know what you think, and we will use that. We're also going to give you a t-shirt.
We're going to make it worth your while, people. If you leave us a review, we're going to send you an all-new, brand spanking, newly designed Highside, Lowside t-shirt. And the winner today, and the winner today, again, just as one last reminder, not a Space Odyssey.
Not a Space Odyssey. Can attest to this whole thing where you can go leave your opinion, which is fun, and then you win a free t-shirt, which is also fun. So please do that if you have the time.
So for Mr. Quartz, for myself, thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure you subscribe to us so you get all of these wonderful episodes in your inbox if you haven't already done so. I think that pretty much wraps it up.
I think we should probably just let these people get back to their lives.
For Zack, for myself, I'm Spurge. Enjoy the ride.
See ya.